We start with Decision 2022 and the beginning of the end of Arizona's longest primary season. Some candidates announcing a year ago. Early voting starts in just a month and a half. Now, there was a slew of primaries nationwide last week, from Oregon to Pennsylvania, and one coming up on Tuesday in Georgia. What do the winners, the losers, and the voters tell us about what could happen here in Arizona by our primary day on August 2nd? Joining us are Christine Jones, former Republican candidate for governor and an attorney, and Roy Herrera, a former Democratic staffer on Capitol Hill, now an election law attorney at Herrera Arellano here in Phoenix. Welcome back to Square Off. Great to see you guys.
Good to see you.
Let's get our disclosures out of the way. Roy, you do work for the Mark Kelly campaign, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Christine, any campaigns you're involved with?
No campaigns this year.
Not this year. Okay. I want to start with the Donald Trump card. And also, just so everybody knows, I gave each of our guests an assignment to come up with their themes today. But I think the Trump card is on all our cards, and the impact of Donald Trump's endorsement in these primaries. And some interesting numbers from Politico. The former president's endorsement is widely believed to be gold. But in competitive Republican primaries, his record is only 7 wins and 4 losses. And that doesn't count the Pennsylvania Senate primary going to a recount, or Tuesday's Georgia primary for governor, where Trump's candidate admits he will get thumped. Also, CNN reported last week that Trump's backing away from endorsing Blake Masters, the protege of billionaire Peter Thiel, here in Arizona's Republican Senate primary. Maybe Trump's getting gun-shy after last week's results. Christine, I'll start with you. Did those primaries expose a weakness in the Trump endorsement?
Well, I'm not sure that there was ever a strength in the Trump endorsement. It may have just been a feature of him endorsing somebody who was already in the lead, or somebody who was eventually going to lead or win. But you know Trump. Trump is a branding guy, and Trump is all about the strength of his brand. So if he feels like his brand can be enhanced by an endorsement, he will do that. My sense is, based on the mixed results that we've seen in Pennsylvania and North Carolina that you didn't mention with Madison Cawthorn, I think he may back off a little bit. But it is really interesting for Arizona candidates who have either already been endorsed by Trump or who wanted to be endorsed by Trump to see what is that impact going to have in our primary in a few months.
Does this take the shine off and maybe give Democrats a better feeling?
Well, I think what the results show, that there's a limitation to Trump's endorsement. And I think the numbers we see across the board in the various races across the country are that the Trump candidate, has a high ceiling, but a high floor and a low ceiling, meaning that the support is always around 30%. Somewhere around there. It doesn't go lower, it doesn't go higher. And if that's enough in a particular primary, particularly like a one-on-one situation, the Trump candidate will win. But if it is a primary with multiple candidates, that 30% may not be enough. And I think we saw that in several races, which leads to the Arizona primaries for governor and Senate, where you do have multiple candidates. Perhaps you'll have Trump-backed candidates in both of those. And the real question I have is the 30% that they're going to get, is that going to be enough for them, or are they going to lose to somebody else?
Well, just so we're clear, so we have a Republican primary for governor. Carrie Lake is the Trump-endorsed candidate, as she keeps telling everybody. Her ceiling might be about 30%. Is that enough to win?
Not now, when you only have 3 candidates, right? You still have a slice that's undecided, and who knows how they tip. But it's not enough just to get that Trump slice, right? She's got to figure out another section of that pie to consume to get, to Roy's point, to the, at least 33, 34, 35, right? To best Karen Taylor Robson and Matt Salmon.
Okay, I want to get to your pick for one of your picks for a trend to watch. You talked about the January 6th issue playing out. How did you see that?
It was interesting watching Pennsylvania and North Carolina, and I think you mentioned Oregon, and watching what's going on in early voting in Georgia for their primary that's coming up. I think this is more granular than just, are you an election integrity advocate, or are you a January 6th advocate? I think it's very instructive for Republicans in Arizona. Stay away from January 6th. That hasn't done a good job for anybody. Election integrity does a good job for everybody. People who are knocking doors, people who are doing rallies, they're all hearing about election integrity. That is a winning message. Stay away from January 6th.
But what what do voters hear when they hear election integrity? What do Republican voters hear?
They hear both, right? So that's why I'm saying you have to divide that message and get a little more granular. I do not support that kind of violent insurrection. I do support, let's make sure our vote is done with integrity.
Well, these primaries exposed how high the stakes are in this election. You have Doug Mastriano of Pennsylvania. He'll be the candidate, Republican candidate for governor. Stop the steal guy, January 6th insurrectionist. He will have power over the 2024 election in Pennsylvania and can throw it out.
That's right.
And here in Arizona, same thing. People on the governor's race, Secretary of State's race, Lake, Fincham, could throw out the results in 2024 if they're elected.
Well, it's even scarier in Pennsylvania, where the governor appoints the Secretary of State. And there's been media articles about the new nominee, the Republican nominee in Pennsylvania, even being a Christian white nationalist and all kinds of stuff. And he is the nominee now, and that's an example where the Trump endorsement did work. But now, when you look at the general election, when he's going against the state attorney general, I think most forecasters will say that the Democrat is actually favored in that important state going into 2024. So I think another aspect of the lessons we learned from Tuesday is the be careful what you wish for thing. Some states don't want a candidate that's that far to the extreme, that could work on both sides of the aisle. And in a state like Arizona, which I think is closer to Pennsylvania as far as being more purple, somebody that's far right, that far pro-Trump, may not be electable in a general election.
And is there kind of a knock-on effect here in Arizona, seeing what might happen to Doug Mastriano, how other Republicans might come after him?
I've always wondered that, and Christine and I have talked about, will Republicans realize maybe we shouldn't nominate somebody that's that far right, because that could be bad for the election, yet it happens over and over again, so I'm not sure the lessons learned.
Let's go to you, Roy. Progressives had an interesting day. Talk about that.
Yeah, and there was several primaries, particularly in congressional races across the country, where the progressive candidate either ousted a more moderate incumbent or, just beat the more moderate candidates in the race. I think it does show that there is a movement across the country where the progressives are doing much, much better, particularly in intra-party battles on the Democratic side. And I think that's going to be interesting going forward to 2024. If we see any primaries here, whether it be in the Senate race or in other races, the progressives actually do have momentum here going forward.
Is that good for Republicans or bad for Republicans in terms of Democrats having some energy, and there have been questions about that?
Well, it's probably good initially, but we all know that you skew to the edges for the primary and you come back to the middle for the general. The Democrats in Arizona tend to have an advantage because they tend not to have really competitive primaries, whereas the Republicans all feed on each other, and skew to the right. The thing that I think is interesting, Roy, and I'm curious how you guys think about this, the turnout is massive. By the way, I know the people who talk about voter suppression want to deny this, but the turnout has been blowing away records in early voting. So I think in Arizona you have to be super careful. If you're going to have a massive turnout, your progressive candidates are going to have to come back to the middle because you have to appeal to the independents. And by the way, Republicans, this applies to you too.
Yeah, it's 100% correct. I mean, I think to win statewide, and we agree with this, every time we talk about it, you have to win through the independents here. I mean, that's the way to victory statewide. And so we go back to a point that you made earlier, is once you have that base, whether it's the Trump base or the progressive base, are you willing to then, in the general election, start appealing to that independent part of the electorate, because that's the way you're going to win. So are you willing to change your messaging once you get into the general? I think that's crucial to victory here in Arizona.
Yeah, they are really up for grabs this time. I have to end it there. We could keep talking. Great conversation. Christine Jones, Roy Herrera, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having us.